No, don't you dare come crawling back here expecting anything from us. My mother's voice sliced through the phone speaker like shattered glass. I stood paralyzed in the parking lot of my apartment complex in Richmond, Virginia, gripping my phone until my knuckles ached. The October wind tore at my jacket, but I couldn't feel the cold, only the ice spreading through my chest. Mom, please, what did I do wrong? My voice cracked. Can we just talk? Talk! She laughed, bitter and sharp. There's nothing to discuss, Ivy. You humiliated this family with your little performance at Natalie's party. We've decided you're no longer welcome here. Stay away. Permanently. The line died. I stared at my phone screen, watching my reflection fade to black. 3 days. That's how long it had been since my sister Natalie's engagement celebration turned into my public execution. My crime? Refusing to lie about my income to make her look more successful in front of her future in-laws. My name is Ivy Morrison, and I'm 27 years old. For the past 5 years, I've worked as a senior account manager at Precision Dynamics, a thriving manufacturing company specializing in industrial robotics. While my family assumed I was barely surviving in some dead-end office job, the truth painted a different picture entirely. My salary of $85,000, combined with quarterly bonuses, had allowed me to build something they never imagined. Actual wealth. The irony burned. My mother, Diane, had spent decades obsessed with appearances. She lived in the same massive house in Richmond's wealthiest neighborhood, maintaining the illusion of prosperity that defined our family name. What she didn't know was that her disappointing daughter had become more financially successful than anyone else in the family. I walked back toward my building, each step heavier than the last. The familiar weight of family disappointment pressed down on my shoulders, but something felt different this time. Final, like a door slamming shut that would never open again. Inside my apartment, I noticed my hands trembling as I tried to unlock the door, not from cold, from the growing certainty that this nightmare was just beginning. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Family financial matters require immediate attention. Contact David Morrison, Sterling Financial Group. I read the message 3 times, my pulse quickening. A financial advisor reaching out about family matters? When I'd just been permanently banished? Something was very wrong, and I had the sinking feeling that the worst was still coming for me. Growing up as a Morrison meant living under a microscope. My mother, Diane, had constructed her entire identity around our family's social standing in Richmond's elite circles. She chaired charity galas, hosted elaborate dinner parties, and ensured our home looked like something from Southern Living magazine. My sister Natalie, 3 years older, had always been the golden child. She'd married her college sweetheart straight after graduation and settled into a comfortable life of part-time work and junior league meetings. Natalie understood the game. She knew exactly what to say, how to smile, and when to laugh to earn our mother's approval. I was the disappointment. After college, I chose career over marriage. I worked 60-hour weeks, managed complex projects, and climbed the corporate ladder at Precision Dynamics. But to my family, success meant social connections and traditional milestones, not professional achievements. The trouble started 5 years ago when I began working in manufacturing. Diane had been horrified that her daughter would take factory work, as she dismissively called it. She couldn't grasp that modern manufacturing involved cutting-edge technology. That my role managing client relationships for robotic automation systems was both challenging and lucrative. "Why can't you find something more respectable?" she'd ask during family dinners. "Something in finance or law?" I tried explaining that I spent my days managing multi-million-dollar contracts, coordinating with engineering teams across 3 continents. But Diane had already formed her opinion. Nothing I said could change it. In her mind, I had settled for less. The financial gap between my reality and their perception widened each year. While they assumed I struggled, I'd been quietly building wealth. My investment portfolio had grown substantially. I owned my apartment outright, something even Natalie couldn't claim about her house. But I kept this private. Partly for my own peace, partly because I knew it would complicate everything. Diane needed someone to feel superior to, and I'd unknowingly filled that role. Revealing my success would shatter the narrative she'd carefully constructed. The engagement party 3 days ago had been the breaking point. When Natalie's future in-laws asked about my work, I'd answered honestly. I mentioned the challenging projects, the international clients, the upcoming contract worth nearly $3 million. Diane's face had darkened with each word. Later, she'd cornered me in the hallway. "You need to downplay your little job at future events," she'd hissed. "It makes Natalie look bad when you go on and on. Can't you just say you're doing fine and leave it at that?" I'd refused. Apparently, that refusal had been unforgivable. 2 days after the devastating phone call, I drove past my childhood home. What I saw made my stomach drop. New locks gleamed on the front door. Brass deadbolts I'd never seen before. I sat in my Honda Accord in the driveway, staring at the house that no longer welcomed me. The rose bushes Diane meticulously maintained showed signs of autumn dormancy. The perfectly manicured lawn looked pristine as always. Everything appeared normal from the outside, but I was no longer part of this picture. Mrs. Henderson from next door walked her golden retriever past my car, waving hesitantly. She'd known me since I was 6 years old, but I could see confusion in her expression. Had Diane told the neighbors I was no longer welcome? The humiliation burned through my chest. I called Natalie that evening, hoping she might help me understand what had triggered such an extreme reaction. Straight to voicemail. "Natalie, it's Ivy. I know you're busy with wedding planning, but I really need to talk. Mom has completely cut me off, and I don't understand what I did that was so terrible. Please call me back." Days passed. Silence. Natalie had chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. Work became my sanctuary. My colleagues at Precision Dynamics noticed my distraction, but I buried myself in projects with renewed intensity. Managing automated assembly line implementations for automotive clients required constant focus, and the demanding schedule kept my mind off the family implosion. My boss, Director Robert Sullivan, called me into his office Thursday afternoon. "Ivy, I wanted to discuss the Henderson manufacturing contract. Your work has been exceptional. The client specifically requested you for their expansion next quarter." The Henderson contract was worth $2.8 million, the largest deal I'd ever managed independently. Under normal circumstances, this would be cause for celebration. Instead, I felt the bitter irony of achieving professional success while losing my family. "Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate the confidence. Are you all right?" His tone was gentle. "You seem distracted lately." "Just some personal matters. Nothing that will affect my work." As I left his office, the contrast hit me hard. My professional life was thriving while my personal life crumbled. I had everything I'd worked for: financial security, career advancement, professional respect, but I'd lost the family connections I'd assumed would be permanent. That evening, my phone rang at 6:47. Local number. Unfamiliar. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. "Miss Morrison? This is David Morrison from Sterling Financial Group. I need to speak with you urgently about your family's financial situation." I set down my fork, appetite vanishing. "I think you have the wrong person. I'm not involved in my family's finances." "Actually, you're more involved than you realize." His voice carried a strain I couldn't identify. "According to my documents, you're listed as the primary beneficiary and emergency contact for both your mother's and sister's investment accounts. I've been trying to reach Diane Morrison for 3 weeks without success. The situation has become critical." My head spun. "That's impossible. My mother just told me I'm no longer welcome in the family. Why would I be listed on her accounts?" "The paperwork was filed 18 months ago. Miss Morrison, I really need to meet with you in person. There are very serious issues we need to discuss, and I can't go into detail over the phone. Would you be available tomorrow morning?" I agreed to meet him at 10, my mind racing. After hanging up, I paced my apartment. Why would Diane list me as her beneficiary and emergency contact while simultaneously exiling me from her life? The contradiction made no sense. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Sterling Financial Group occupied a modest office building downtown, and David Morrison turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 50s with gentle eyes that probably helped clients discuss difficult realities. "Thank you for coming, Miss Morrison. Please have a seat." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I'm afraid what I have to tell you is quite serious." He opened a thick folder and spread documents across his desk. "Your mother and sister have been making catastrophic financial decisions over the past 2 years. They've liquidated most of their retirement accounts, taken out massive loans against your mother's house, and invested heavily in what appears to be a fraudulent investment scheme." My stomach dropped. "How much are we talking about?" David's expression was grave. "Combined, they've lost approximately $400,000. The house your mother lives in is now mortgaged to its full value. They owe substantial amounts to several creditors. Diane has been avoiding my calls because she knows the situation is dire." I stared at the paperwork, trying to process the numbers. $400,000. The house that had been in our family for 25 years was essentially gone. "There's more," David continued. "The investment firm they put their money into was shut down by federal authorities last month. The principals have been arrested for running a Ponzi scheme. Your mother and sister are among hundreds of victims, but because they borrowed against the house to increase their investment, their losses are particularly severe." "Why are you telling me this?" Though I suspected, I already knew the answer. "Because as their listed emergency contact and beneficiary, you have the legal authority to make decisions on their behalf if they become incapacitated or refuse to address the situation themselves." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "And Miss Morrison, based on their current trajectory, they're going to lose everything within the next 60 days unless someone intervenes." The irony hit me like a sledgehammer. My mother had banished me from the family for being an embarrassment, but I was apparently her only hope for financial salvation. I left David's office, clutching copies of financial documents that painted a devastating picture. The drive home gave me time to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. By the time I reached my apartment, shock had transformed into a mixture of fury and disbelief. Diane and Natalie had fallen victim to a company called Horizon Capital Ventures, which had promised returns of 25% annually on real estate development projects. The scheme had been sophisticated: glossy brochures, fake testimonials, professional-looking offices in downtown Richmond. What made it particularly cruel was that the scammers had specifically targeted older adults and their children, playing on fears about retirement security. I spread the documents across my dining table and began calculating the damage. The house, worth approximately $600,000 when my father died 10 years ago, now carried mortgages totaling $550,000. Diane's retirement accounts, which should have contained at least $300,000, had been completely drained. Even Natalie's modest 401k had been cashed out to fund additional investments. The monthly obligations were staggering. Between mortgage payments, insurance, utilities, and minimum payments on credit cards and loans, Diane needed at least $4,500 monthly just to maintain status quo. But according to David's notes, her only income was Social Security and a small pension from my father's company, totaling perhaps $2,800 monthly. I called David back that evening. "How long before they lose the house?" "Based on their current payment history, I'd estimate 6 weeks before the bank initiates foreclosure proceedings. The credit card companies are already calling daily. I've heard from 3 different collection agencies this week." "Have you been able to reach my mother?" "She's been avoiding all contact with financial institutions. I think she knows how bad things are and doesn't want to face reality." After ending the call, I opened my laptop. A quick Facebook search revealed that Diane had been tagged in several photos from charity events and social gatherings as recently as last week. She was still maintaining her public image while privately facing financial ruin. The next morning, I drove to her house. This time, I didn't try my old key. I rang the doorbell and waited. After several minutes, Natalie answered, looking haggard and avoiding eye contact. "Ivy, you shouldn't be here. Mom said—" "I know what Mom said," I interrupted. "But we need to talk about David Morrison and Horizon Capital Ventures." Natalie's face went white. How do you know about that? Because I'm apparently your emergency contact and beneficiary. Something you both conveniently forgot to mention when you decided to exile me from the family. I pushed past her into the foyer. Several expensive pieces of furniture were missing. The antique grandfather clock that had belonged to my grandmother was gone. The Persian rug that had anchored the living room for decades had vanished. Where's Mom? She's not feeling well. Natalie's voice was weak. Ivy, we didn't know who else to turn to. The investment advisor seemed so legitimate. They said we could double our money in 2 years. We thought we were being smart, planning for the future. By mortgaging the house? By cashing out your retirement accounts? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Natalie began crying. We thought Mom would never have to worry about money again, and I wanted to help pay for my wedding without asking Trevor's parents for money. It seemed like the perfect solution. The perfect solution had become a perfect disaster. Diane finally emerged from her bedroom 20 minutes later, moving like a woman who'd aged a decade in the past month. When she saw me standing in her living room, her expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. I told you not to come here. But there was no force behind the words. David Morrison told me everything. $400,000, Mom. The house, your retirement, Natalie's 401k, all of it gone. Diane sank into her remaining armchair, suddenly looking every one of her 68 years. How was I supposed to know they were criminals? They had references, a beautiful office, testimonials from other clients. Margaret Thompson from the Garden Club invested with them and said they were wonderful. Margaret Thompson lost everything too. The whole thing was a Ponzi scheme. They used new investors' money to pay fake returns to earlier investors. When they couldn't recruit enough new victims, the whole thing collapsed. I pulled out my phone and showed them a news article about the arrests. The principal organizers are facing federal charges for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. They operated the scheme for 3 years and stole approximately $50 million from investors across Virginia. Diane stared at the article, her hands shaking. We're going to lose the house, aren't we? Unless something changes dramatically, yes. The weight of the situation settled over us like a heavy blanket. I looked around the living room where I'd spent countless childhood hours, trying to imagine strangers living here after foreclosure. There is another option, I said finally, but it would require some significant changes. Both women looked at me expectantly. I could help. I have the financial resources to stop the foreclosure and manage the debt situation. But it would mean acknowledging some things about my life that you've both chosen to ignore. Diane's expression hardened slightly. What do you mean? I mean that your disappointing daughter who works in a factory has been quite successful. I make more money than both of you combined. I own my apartment outright, and I have substantial savings and investments. Natalie gaped at me. How much do you make? Enough to help, I said, avoiding specifics. But first, I need to understand something. Why did you list me as your beneficiary and emergency contact, if you think so little of me and my choices? Diane looked away, embarrassed. Your father insisted on it when we updated our wills. He said you were the most responsible person in the family, that if anything happened to us, you'd be the one who could handle things properly. Dad was right. My voice was quiet but firm. But after what happened at Natalie's engagement party, after you locked me out and told me never to come back, I'm not sure I want to handle anything for people who treat me like a family embarrassment. I let the silence stretch between us, watching my mother and sister absorb the full implications of their situation. Diane's carefully maintained composure was cracking. Natalie looked like she might be sick. So what happens now? Diane asked finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Now you decide how badly you want to keep this house and avoid bankruptcy. Because I'm not writing any checks until we establish some new ground rules for how this family operates. I pulled out a notebook and pen, setting them on the coffee table with deliberate precision. First, We're going to have an honest conversation about money. All of it. No more lies, no more pretending, no more maintaining appearances at the expense of reality. Diane flinched. Ivy, you don't understand the pressure? I understand plenty. I cut her off. I understand that you were so concerned with looking successful that you risked everything on a get-rich-quick scheme. I understand that you were so busy judging my career choices that you failed to notice I was building actual wealth while you were destroying yours. Natalie shifted uncomfortably. We never meant for things to get this bad. Intent doesn't matter when you're facing foreclosure. What matters is making smart decisions going forward. And the first smart decision is acknowledging that I'm not the family failure you both thought I was. I opened my notebook and began writing. Here's what I'm willing to do. I'll pay off the immediate debts to stop the foreclosure proceedings. I'll consolidate your remaining obligations into a manageable payment plan. And I'll help you both develop realistic budgets that don't depend on magic investment returns. Hope began creeping into their expressions. But, I continued, in exchange, this family is going to operate very differently from now on. No more dismissing my career, no more treating me like an embarrassment, and absolutely no more financial decisions made without consulting me first. What kind of decisions? Natalie asked nervously. All of them. Every expenditure over $500 gets approved by me. Every investment opportunity gets reviewed by me and David Morrison. And both of you are going to take financial literacy classes so this never happens again. Diane looked stricken. You're asking us to give up our independence. No, I replied firmly. I'm asking you to give up your delusions. Independence is earned through responsible behavior. You both lost that privilege when you gambled away $400,000. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken realizations. And one more thing, I added. You're both going to apologize, in writing, for how you've treated me over the years. For dismissing my career, for making me feel like I wasn't good enough, for locking me out of this house like I was some kind of criminal. I want it documented. That's cruel, Natalie whispered. No, I said coldly. What's cruel is being told you're not welcome in your own family because you wouldn't lie to make someone else look better. What's cruel is spending 5 years being treated like a disappointment when you are actually the most successful person in the room. What's cruel is changing the locks on your daughter's childhood home without a conversation. I stood up, gathering my notebook. You have 24 hours to decide. If you want my help, you meet my terms. All of them. If not, I'll walk away and let the foreclosure proceedings continue. Your choice. I walked toward the door, then paused. And just so we're clear, I don't need you. You need me. Remember that when you're making your decision. I left them sitting in silence, knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would change. One way or another. They called the next morning at 8:15. We accept your terms, Diane said, her voice hollow but resigned. Within 48 hours, I'd arranged to pay off the most pressing debts and halt the foreclosure proceedings. The relief on their faces was palpable, but I made sure they understood this was not a return to business as usual. I established myself as the primary contact for all financial institutions and creditors, giving me complete visibility into every aspect of their spending. The first monthly budget review revealed exactly how disconnected from reality they'd become. $300 for a single dinner at La Maison? I asked, reviewing Natalie's credit card statement. While you're supposedly struggling to pay your mortgage? It was Trevor's birthday, Natalie protested weakly. We wanted to celebrate somewhere special. You can celebrate at Olive Garden until your financial situation improves. Special occasions don't justify financial irresponsibility. Diane's spending was even more egregious. Hair appointments, designer clothing, charitable donations to maintain her social status. Hundreds of dollars flowing out each month while she claimed poverty. The Garden Club expects certain standards, she argued when I questioned a $200 donation to their silent auction. The Garden Club can expect you to contribute your time instead of money you don't have. Your social standing isn't worth losing your home, I restructured their entire financial lives with the efficiency I brought to my work at Precision Dynamics. Automatic payments, restricted credit limits, weekly check-ins became the new normal. Both women chafed at the oversight, but they'd forfeited the right to financial independence when they lost $400,000 to a scam. The most satisfying moment came when I informed them they would both need to find employment to contribute to household expenses. Diane hadn't worked outside the home in 30 years. Natalie had never held a full-time job. "But what will people think?" Diane asked, horrified. "They'll think you're responsible adults who take care of their obligations." Novel concept, I know. 3 weeks later, Diane found herself working part-time at an upscale boutique in Carytown, dealing with inventory management and customer service. Natalie took a position as a receptionist at a dental office, discovering for the first time what it meant to have a boss and fixed working hours. Both women struggled with the transition from lives of leisure and social obligations to the reality of actual employment. Diane complained constantly about being on her feet all day. Natalie found the routine of regular work hours exhausting. "I don't understand how you've done this for years," Natalie said during one of our weekly financial meetings. "Working every day, dealing with deadlines and demanding clients. It's so much harder than I thought." "That's because you never took it seriously," I replied. "You both acted like work was something other people did, while you focused on more important things like charity luncheons and social status." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now managing the very people who had dismissed my management skills for years. Every financial decision that had once been made impulsively now required my approval. Every expense had to be justified and documented. The control I exercised over their lives was complete, and I had to admit, it was deeply satisfying. David Morrison proved to be an excellent ally in maintaining financial discipline. He provided monthly reports on their progress and helped me identify any signs of backsliding into old patterns. The fear of losing everything had made both Diane and Natalie temporarily compliant, but I knew that without constant oversight, they would likely revert to their previous habits. I also insisted on the written apologies. They came 3 weeks into the new arrangement. Handwritten letters that acknowledged their mistreatment, their dismissal of my achievements, their cruel behavior surrounding the engagement party, and the changed locks. Reading those letters felt like vindication. But something about them also felt hollow. 6 months after the crisis began, we achieved a major milestone. The house was no longer in immediate danger of foreclosure, and all credit card balances had been reduced to manageable levels. More importantly, both Diane and Natalie had developed a grudging respect for the financial discipline that had saved them from ruin. During our final family meeting of the year, Diane surprised me. "Ivy, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice formal but sincere. "I was wrong about your career, wrong about your capabilities, and wrong to treat you as a disappointment. You saved our family when we were too proud and foolish to save ourselves." The apology felt good, but it couldn't erase years of dismissal and condescension. "I appreciate that, Mom. But this isn't about proving I was right or you were wrong. It's about building a family relationship based on honesty and mutual respect going forward." Natalie nodded emphatically. "I had no idea how hard you worked or how successful you'd become. I feel terrible that we made you feel like you didn't measure up, when really we were the ones who weren't measuring up." As the calendar turned and the first anniversary of the crisis approached, I reflected on how completely the family dynamics had shifted. The daughter who had once been locked out of her childhood home now held the keys to her family's financial future. The embarrassment who wasn't welcome at family gatherings had become the person they depended on for survival. Diane and Natalie both faced lasting consequences from their financial recklessness. Diane's reputation in her social circles never fully recovered once word spread about her employment at the boutique. Several former friends from the garden club distanced themselves, unable to reconcile their image of her with the reality of her reduced circumstances. Natalie's wedding had to be dramatically scaled back, causing tension with Trevor's family and forcing her to confront the gap between her aspirations and her actual means. One evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing their monthly financial reports, I realized something unexpected. The victory I'd achieved felt more hollow than I'd imagined. Yes, they now respected me. Yes, they acknowledged my success. Yes, they depended on me for everything. But the relationship wasn't built on genuine love or understanding. It was built on necessity and power dynamics. They respected me because they had to, not because they wanted to. I thought about my father's words, spoken years before he died. "Ivy," he'd said, "being right isn't always the same as being happy." I was right. I had been right all along about my career, my choices, my capabilities. But was I happy? Looking at the financial spreadsheets, the payment schedules, the weekly check-in reminders, I realized I'd constructed a different kind of prison. One where I was the warden instead of the prisoner, but a prison nonetheless. I closed my laptop and stared out the window at the Richmond skyline. The question lingered in my mind. In winning this battle, proving my worth, and extracting my revenge, had I lost something more important? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But as I watched the city lights flicker in the darkness, I wondered if there was a way forward that didn't involve control and oversight. A way to have a family that wasn't built on financial dependence and forced respect. Maybe that was the next challenge I needed to figure out. Or maybe some victories just came at a cost that couldn't be calculated in spreadsheets and budget reports. Only time would tell.